And after what felt like an eternity to me, he finally steps in and starts talking. You are listening to Saints in the South. All right, welcome to another episode of Saints in the South. Glad you're with us. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for commenting and sharing and so forth. So today we are in chapters 8 through 12 of the book of Alma, and the title of it is Jesus Christ Will Come to Redeem His People. And so Alma, he's out serving a mission, and he's recently preached in Gideon, and he's returning back to his own home and to rest from his labors. And I thought of the scripture of when it references that there in that first verse, not the principle of not running faster than you have strength.
Right.
So he goes back to his home to rest from his labors, to kind of regather himself, maybe take care of some, stuff at the house and so forth. And then he, there in the beginning, verses 3 through 5, he travels to a land of Melek, and he sees a lot of success there in teaching the gospel and baptizing people and so forth. And remember, and these lands that he's traveling to, they're Nephites. They're not Lamanites. So he is teaching the people of Nephi here. After seeing a lot of success there, he travels to a city called Ammonihah. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. I don't know. And for you, for all of you missionaries out there, I think of being transferred. You go from one area to another area there, and then from there in Ammonihah, he finds a different scenario, and he doesn't see a lot of success, and they immediately begin to reject him there and stuff. And so we can jump in here. Anybody have any thoughts or anything to this point?
Well, I mean, my first thought was definitely, missionary work and being transferred and seeing different results from one place to another, which we're going to talk about here in Ammonihah compared to how he had success in Melek. Mm-hmm. But I also thought about, we talk a lot on here about being parents, and we have different children and different ways that they receive the gospel from us. Or different ways they receive any instruction. And being a parent, I think my mind always turns to that. But, not every message we give to our kids, whether it be spiritual or temporal, is always received the same by all of them. So I think there's lessons to be gleaned from a different aspect as well. And certainly the way he had to come back and kind of changes perspective. Certainly do that with children from time to time.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it says verse 10, he labored much in the spirit, wrestling with God in mighty prayer. And this was a man, Alma, that prepared and had all his T's crossed and his I's dotted, and he was ready. But yet these people in Ammonihah, we find out they're not too receptive. And right. It's just like Stephen's saying, sometimes we can have the best talk or the best lesson, and we think this is exactly what our family needs, and this is going to turn them around. My kids need to hear this, and then all of a sudden we find out it really didn't affect them at all. We feel like I feel like a failure sometimes. Like, man, I thought, what did I do wrong there? And it's it's just, it goes back to that thing where they're learning, they're listening. I forgot the quote now, but anyway, children learn when they're ready to learn. Basically, it's
Yeah.
We do the best we can, and we keep trying to bring the spirit there. That's what Alma's trying to do here.
Yeah.
I like so how many of y'all heard some variation of verse 11 on your missions there?
Verse 11. Oh yeah.
Nevertheless, we know that you're missionaries from your church, but we do not believe in such foolish traditions.
Yeah, we are not of thy church.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, in my mission, there were stickers. I served in Colombia, South America, and there were stickers on some doors that said, and I think I got one maybe somewhere. It looked like a little bumper sticker, but it had the Divino Niño, which is the divine child, which is the Jesus, as a child or whatever. And that's just kind of the thing with the Catholics there that they have or did at least 25 years ago or whatever. But but anyway, it would say, here we are Catholics. Our fathers were Catholics. We plan on staying Catholics forever. We are not interested in any other religion or something like that. And it was on a lot of the doors, and it was just like,
Wow.
Pretty much just kind of point blank.
Mm-hmm.
We knocked those doors anyway, but
It's the same. It was the same in the Dominican Republic. Those were all over the place.
Yeah. So, I mean, and honestly, some of those people were the most open, it was crazy. They had those stickers or whatever, but you always give them a chance and see, and respectfully, if they don't, then we politely say, okay. So
talking about missions, I remember having the best discussion. My Spanish was very beautiful, very good. I was in Saraní del Shi. I was talking to a guy named Javier, and we went in. I taught about the Book of Mormon. I thought it went wonderful. The spirit was strong. I was on cloud 9. It was wonderful, great. And I asked Javier, I said, how was it? Hey, it's all right. He said, I got to go. So I left there thinking, wow, I felt the spirit so strong. Yeah. I really, really did. I felt it so strong. Months later, we used to kind of get together at transfer at a place there in Montevideo at a bus station. And I asked the elder who was serving inside of DDLC, how are things going? He said, man, we just baptized one of the greatest guys. His name was Javier. And basically he thought about it months later about our discussion and how the church. And so therefore I didn't feel like my time was wasted. I feel like a seed was planted, and how great it was just to see that joy later, even though at the moment I was like, man,
that's awesome.
I don't get to figure this. I mean, it was just
confusing. So in the moment, it felt like there was nothing, but he acted like there was nothing there, but he did feel something. And it wasn't until months later that you found out that it did affect him. That's amazing.
I left there disheartening because I felt the spirit, and it was just it's a very confusing moment as a young missionary. And it wasn't until months later exactly. So the joy of seeing that later and returning speedingly, as Alma mentions later, in this chapter 8, by returning speedingly, asking about Saraní del Shi and all. But anyway, just interesting. Just don't ever give up. Like Alma the younger, he didn't give up.
Mm-hmm.
I know you already made the point that these were Nephites. So I mean, I think there's a lesson in there to be learned too about, it's not just about sharing the gospel with those that haven't received it, but these would have been aware of the traditions of their fathers and the religion that they came from, even down to the point of knowing that he had the judgment seat, and saying, not only do we not believe in your traditions, but you don't have any power over us anymore. You're not the chief judge. Right. So it did make it a little more difficult, but significant contrast between the success that he just had in Melek, and then what happened here in Ammonihah. Sorry.
I think of Russell Nelson saying the spirit cannot be restrained when pure testimony of Christ is born, and that's always true. Whether the people accept it or not, the spirit is there. If for whatever reason, just like with Andrew's example there with Javier, it's it may be something that touches them way later. We just don't know, but the spirit will be there. If we're testifying of pure doctrine, testifying of Christ, the spirit will be there, and we still have our agency. People have their agency, what they feel or what they whatever the situation is, but it's there.
Yeah, that's the same thing the Elder Packer taught about pure doctrine. That famous quote that he has that says, "Pure doctrine understood." Yep, it's not just the pure doctrine, but the pure doctrine has to be understood as what is going to change behaviors. And we see that later in the same lesson with Zeezrom. I think we said it's pronounced.
Right, yeah.
How significant is that? Do y'all think that that Alma had given up the position as chief judge? Because I think it's interesting that when he's out, he's traveling, he's preaching and teaching, and they're telling him, you don't have any authority over us. I mean, whatever. Where if he probably could have kept his position if he had chosen to. Oh yeah. And still, he could have theoretically had power to tell people, what to do, but he willingly gave up his position as chief judge and just to focus on being the high priest. And so when he was teaching these people, it was kind of like the separation of church and state we have today, where it was completely they had the freedom to accept or reject him, his message. So he kind of willingly gave up that authority to. I don't know. To me, it seems significant there that they.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
they weren't. He couldn't coerce them in any way. He willingly
it
set
definitely
that situation up.
Yeah, it definitely allows him to calibrate a little better what these people, accept or don't accept because of perhaps a position that he holds. An authoritative position like with law and stuff like that. They could have easily been like, oh, we got to sit here and listen because if we don't, he'll have us arrested or whatever. And so it really stripped him down in a way, if you want to call it that, stripped him down to the bare man or whatever you want to call, as just a citizen along with them, basically, just like our clergy and the church today. We're all on the same playing field as far as like who we are. And when we get in that building, I mean, we have callings and things that, that we have responsibilities, but there's no authoritative, make you do this or make you do that type thing there. So.
So he's kicked out of the city, and he's traveling to another land, and then he receives the visitation of the angel again. It actually ends up being the same angel, I guess, the Lord that visited him the first time, and he tells him, "Hey, I need you to go back." And I'm sure he's like, "What you mean? They just kicked me out of there."
Exactly, and I always thought, I don't guess I've ever noticed that it's the same angel.
Yeah,
and that was just pretty neat. That's his assigned angel.
That's right.
I mean, whatever. I mean, really.
I forgot about that too.
I did too. When I seen it, I was like, oh.
And notice how he received that there in 18. It says, and now it came to pass after Alma had received his message from the angel of the Lord, he returned speedily to the land of Ammonihah. He was not one, having had the experiences that he had, to delay a prompting, or in this case, a visitation from an angel with that instruction.
Yeah, the people are lost. They're going towards a spiritual death, and Alma the Younger is a perfect example of a rescuer. In chapter 8 talks about all these verses. In verse 10 he's praying. Verse 14 he's caring for him. He's weighed down. 15 lifting your head up, and then 18 returning speedily. Verse 26 fasting for him, and then verse 30 let the Holy Spirit guide, filled with the Holy Ghost. It's a great. Alma the Younger he's just going back to rescue the people, and because they are lost and going towards a spiritual death. And
that's a great point, Andrew. I love that he's a rescuer, and he is a well-equipped rescuer. I mean, he is the tip-top professional. Because he's, like you're saying, he's fasted, he's prayed, he's studied, he's pondered, but more than all that, even going back to his turning point with the angel visiting him the first time, he knows what kind of rescuing needs to be done because he himself was rescued from the very deepest pit, and so he has such enthusiasm. And what better? I've said this before, but what better person? To do the work that he's doing. I mean, he knows exactly where these people are headed, and he does not want them to be there. So
yeah, I like to go ahead. Go ahead.
You got.
Well, I was just going to mention when the Lord or the angels visiting him, it's interesting to me that of what the angel points out to him. And we've heard time and time again how the Book of Mormon is for our day. And there's two verses that jumped out to me in this chapter, and then one and later on that I'll reference here. And with all that's going on right now with the death of George Floyd and the riotings and everything and the upheaval and so forth, listen to these couple verses right here. I'm going to read to you. In verse 17, it says, "For behold, they do study at this time that they may destroy the liberty of thy people. For thus saith the Lord, which is contrary to the statutes and judgments and commandments which he has given unto his people." And then cross-referencing later on, when Alma and Amulek are kind of continuing there with Zeezrom. In verse 20, it says, "Now it was for the sole purpose to get gain, because they received their wages according to their employ. Therefore they did stir up the people to riotings, and all manner of disturbances and wickedness, that they might have more employ, that they might get money according to the suits which were brought before them. Therefore, they did stir up the people against Alma and Amulek. And I bring this up just because you can really apply this. And I know that you've got those race issues out there, but I also believe with that that people that are in power, that have lots of money, take opportunities like this and create havoc, create chaos. I mean, just from the example of, pallets of bricks and stuff being delivered on the corners, and buses of people being shipped into cities and so forth. And man, it's exactly what's going on here. It's interesting that we're coming across these verses at this time. So
yeah, absolutely.
There's people that will definitely take advantage of a crisis and a tragedy, which this was, and they'll try to use it for their own gain.
That's right. And so as I've thought about what's going on now for us, more and more, at the core of changing the direction that people are on, and the way they think and the way they believe, and their ideologies and everything, it really gets back to the basics of converting someone to the gospel of Jesus Christ, or turning to the Lord themselves. Mm-hmm. That's how someone is going to truly change there and so forth. Goes
back to that pure doctrine, and
exactly.
Yeah. Certainly, I'm sure that was part of the message that the angel had for Alma, to give him some gusto to speedily return to the city there. And I think it's a little funny, but also a little poetic for us as well. In teaching people, sometimes we do have to approach it by a different way with our kids, like we talked about, and they all don't receive the same message in the same way. We might have to take a step back, think, what am I doing here? What do I need to adjust? And he actually entered the city by a different way. In our case, he came on the way which was on, by the way which was on the south of the city. So he came in from the south.
That's right.
Which is where the good people are.
That's right. And obviously,
I get it now.
That's right.
That's where
that's awesome.
where he meets one of my favorite people in the whole Book of Mormon, Amulek, right?
Yeah.
Amulek. So I like Amulek, man. He's got one of the best sermons in the Book of Mormon. But yeah,
I think about whenever he sees this angel, the same angel again. He's got, what a boost of confidence. What this is a time when Alma's feeling pretty down, pretty low, because he's leaving there. Everybody's rejecting him, spit on him, everything else, and he's feeling bad and wishing he could help these people. That's his desire. That's the desire of his heart. He could have easily walked away from there saying, all right, forget you guys. I mean, it does actually say a little later that he's saying, I wasn't going to return again. I'd done all I could do, but he still had a desire to help these people, and he wished he had a way that he could do it. And here's this angel showing up and again, and, I'm sure that it just gave him such a boost to know that Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ, I have help, I have help. People are watching me. People are supporting me and cheering me on. And that's not just for Alma. That's for all of us. When we have those moments of doubt or just defeat or whatever you want to call it, we have help. We have help. Heaven is cheering us on when we're trying to do something right, and we're trying to do the best we can. And, the Lord's with us. He understands, he sees, and things will happen as they should, if we're trying our best. So,
but sometimes it will take getting to that point where Alma was, where he was at the depths of despair, to the point of leaving the city, and maybe the Lord testing to see how much he actually wanted to share the gospel.
Right.
But like you said, just at that particular moment, giving him that support and that confirmation that he needed, that he was doing the right thing.
Right.
So the people were complaining. Well, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, so we're getting into Amulek now. So you go ahead, Andrew.
Well, actually real right. People were complaining in the city about, Alma the Younger. He's the only witness, there in beginning of chapter 9, talk about, you're the only one talking about this. You're the only witness. And, It reminds me of 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. And how true that was back then. You know, Amulek is getting prepared. And even the lawyer who we'll talk about, he has a conversion later, and just how these two, you know.
Spoiler.
Spoiler alert. I didn't say which lawyer, though.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Stay tuned.
I think it's significant too. Before they started this, back in Alma 8:27, before they began to preach again.
Yeah.
Verse 27, it says Alma tarried many days with Amulek before he began to preach. Just like you talked about, he returned to his home prior to going on with his mission after Gideon. But he may have been helping Amulek get up to speed in the gospel, kind of a little mini MTC for him.
That's right.
Yeah, that's exactly my thought. I mean, right there, I put MTC on my notes.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
I thought that's exactly what they're doing. You got to think both these men were inspired to know how to contend with these lawyers. The tactic of Satan coming up is going to be his whole thing is going to be, oh, only one person is going to tell us to do this. You know, you're one man and you're going to come in here and tell us to change our ways. How are we supposed to believe just one man that all these, and that was going to be the big deal. And we see how the Lord's already preparing Alma for this that's coming up by giving him Amulek to say, here's your number 2. Here's the other guy. Here's your other witness right here. And now they're not going to have anything to really go on. That's going to destroy their whole hypothesis or whatever you want to call it, their whole little plan that they've got going on, you know. So
yeah, I was just going to say, you know, during that time, I can't imagine that they weren't taking themselves so much prayer and fasting, just like the disciples of Christ found that there were certain types of demons that couldn't be cast out without much fasting and prayer. And maybe the same thing with the people in Ammonihah, that they didn't. They knew they needed to prepare themselves maybe just a little bit more to return to the city, regardless of the eventual outcome.
Yeah, I think of because Amulek, he's a part of these people, you know, so he's not a stranger unto them, and so I just think about the human side of us and getting ready to go out among a people that who are many of your friends, many of your associates, many of your coworkers and things like that. And I mean, he says that he's well known in the community. And so this city has rejected Alma, and now Amulek, who know these people, has now joined with Alma. Right. And so I'm sure there's a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of nervousness there on his part. So I'm sure he was, like you said, Stephen, was fasting and praying that he might know exactly what he needed to say to those people.
Mm-hmm. And the words they had must have been very powerful compared to what Mormon was reading and compiling at this time, because he completely switches from a commentary on what's happened and goes straight to the words of Alma and Amulek.
First person.
This is not an abridgment. It says before chapter 9 that chapters 9 through 14 are the words of these two missionaries.
Right. We can't say enough about how powerful fasting is. I feel like that's something that's needs to be stressed more in the gospel, even for myself to really understand it better. I mean, fasting is such a powerful thing. We had a lesson one time here with the family, and it's, I don't know if you guys have ever done this with explaining, my kids were a little bit smaller then, but explaining what fasting is compared to, say, just prayer alone. And we had a screwdriver with a screw and a piece of wood. And then I told Gavin, my son or whatever, to start screwing in that screw. And I said, I'm going to race you. I said, I'm going to do this one. I got a screw over here. And so we went to it, and all of a sudden I pull out the power drill and I just go down with it. And he's like, hey, that's cheating or whatever. I said, no. I said, that's fasting. I said, your screwdriver represents prayer. I said, but when we throw in fasting with prayer, if we come in with fasting, I said, it's just like this power drill. It's powerful. It amplifies what we can do. It gives us power. As a matter of fact, there's a thing here. Joseph B. Worthling said, fasting in the proper spirit and in the Lord's way will energize us spiritually. It will strengthen our self-discipline, fill our homes with peace, lighten our hearts with joy, fortify us against temptation, prepare us for times of adversity, and open the windows of heaven. And Alma, if anybody at this time, and Amulek, they needed this fasting. They needed this power to come upon them. And there's some really cool things. They in verse 31 of chapter 8 says they did not exercise their power until they were bound in bands and cast into prison. That's that faith precedes the miracle. They could have easily said, you're not going to put me in bands. It's not going to happen, but they allowed it to happen so that they could show the power of the Lord even more, but it's pretty cool how they had this power with them because of what they'd done to prepare themselves.
As Amulek begins to preach and discuss, I like how he lets them know who he is. He gives his lineage there. He lets you know that he's a descendant of Lehi, who is a descendant of Manasseh, and everything. And then I like in verse 6 there of chapter 10, it says, "Nevertheless, I did harden my heart, for I was called many times, and I would not hear." Mm-hmm. And I think all of us can probably apply that one to ourselves at some point in our lives there.
Yeah. Now he was obedient there in verse 8, and it came to pass that I obeyed the voice of the angel. Sometimes we hear, obedience is the first law of heaven, and how when you obey, the Lord will bless you there. There in Dr. Covenant's 82:10, the Lord is bound when you do what he say, but when you do not what he say, you have no promise. And when we obey the Lord, he is bound to bless us on what the blessings that we need. He knows what blessings we need, but
we kind of get a good definition of that famous Book of Mormon promise in chapter 9 and verse 13 and 14 when they're teaching them the words that were taught to Lehi, that inasmuch as you shall keep my commandments, you shall prosper in the land. But I think it's interesting that not a lot of times they go into a little more detail in the last part of that verse where it says, "Inasmuch as you will not keep my commandments," instead of not prospering in the lands, it says, "You shall be cut off from the presence of the Lord." So that's how you are not going to prosper. You're going to not have the presence of the Lord to be able to guide you. I thought it's a little bit of a change in how that's usually mentioned in most of the scriptures in the Book of Mormon, but significant lesson in how we are not going to prosper by not having his presence with us.
I just wanted to make mention in chapter 9 in verse 15. And this is where they're speaking, and before these verses, there's a lot of remember. He's talking to basically members of the church that have kind of fallen away at this point. And he starts to tell them that in verse 15, "Nevertheless, I say unto you that it shall be more tolerable for them." And when we say them, he's talking about the Lamanites and basically those that don't have the gospel. "It'll be more tolerable for them in the day of judgment than for you, if you remain in your sins. Yea, and even more tolerable for them in this life than for you, except you repent." And he goes on to talk about how the Lamanites, it's because of the traditions of their fathers that they believe what they believe. It's not that they knew the gospel and then turned away from it, as these people in Ammonihah has. And so it goes on to talk a little bit about that. And basically it goes back to, if you cross-reference the word tolerable, I believe the footnote, but anyway, it goes to Luke 12:47 and 48. And it says, "And that servant which knew his Lord's will and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. But he that knew not and did commit things worthy of stripes shall be beaten with few stripes. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more." So it's just true. The more knowledge, the more experience and things that we gain from the gospel, the more we're responsible for. The bigger the
with
sin.
Great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, Spider-Man. I mean, there you go. I mean,
right.
Or much is given, much is required.
It really is an epic line. I mean, if you think about it, it's so true. So you can turn that right on to what Alma and Amulek, they do have great power right now. They do have a great responsibility. But yeah, the more we know, the more we, understand, the more we're responsible for. And so it goes back to that thing. Why should we learn anything then? Why don't we just stay ignorant? And because you can't be saved in ignorance. That's in Doctrine and Covenants as well. So we are here to learn and to grow and to experience. And what that does is in a nutshell, it gives us a huge head start in the life to come. It's super important that we stay, keep on striving, keep on learning. So
yeah. So as I mentioned before, Amulek, he just like a good companion does, he steps in right there and picks up where Alma leaves off. He introduces himself and, explains how he, the meeting between him and Alma, and how he was, called of the angel himself.
I really like when he begins, after he kind of introduces himself and talks about his background. He kind of immediately turns to his spiritual makeup, and he says, 6 is one of my favorite scriptures from his beginning of his address there. It says, "Nevertheless, I did harden my heart, for I was called many times, and I would not hear. Wherefore I knew concerning these things, yet I would not know." Kind of deep there. "Wherefore I went on rebelling against God in the wickedness of my heart." He had known these things, yet he would not know. He had been called many times, yet he would not hear. That old thing of knocking and it shall be open, seeking
Right.
you shall find. He's openly admitting that he had been called. It had been knocked for him, but he had not been receiving.
He said that he used the word hear. I was called many times and would not hear. He didn't say I was called many times and didn't hearken or whatever. He
did. It's not like he didn't hear it. He wouldn't hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems to imply that when you're not, because, once again, I kind of liken myself to Alma sometimes. Not that I'm ever be as awesome as he became, but just because, he went through some, he was stupid for a while, to put it bluntly. And the thing is, when you're not, when you're in a position to, when you're not being obedient to the Lord, and when you're not living your life the way the Lord would have you to live, you put yourself in a position where it's difficult to hear the voice of the Spirit, even when the Lord is talking to you. And that's what happens with people. I believe that it's not that the Lord ever stops talking to us or stops trying to call to us. It's the fact that we put ourselves in a position where we're not able to hear his voice, where we don't, it's not like people are like willfully disobeying God. At a certain point, it's like they've closed themselves off so much that they don't hear that voice. They don't hear that still small voice.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that he says he went on rebelling against God. When I was studying this, I had never, in the times I read the Book of Mormon, seen the day that he says, until, this is when he stopped rebelling against God, until the 4th day of the 7th month.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He brings it down to the very day there, but
July 4th.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Independence Day.
Independence Day.
But I do like how you point out that, Stephen, where he says he knew these things, but he would not know. So deep down, he knew he wasn't following God. He knew he was choosing to not follow the promptings of the Spirit that he had been receiving.
I want to make a plug on there's a great talk, October 2016 General Conference, Dieter F. Uchtdorf. It's entitled "Learn from Alma and Amulek." It's amazing. I mean, I'm not going to go into it, but just anybody that wants to look into that, they can. We got Amulek's a member of the church. He's not a perfect member of the church. We've either been an Amulek or we know an Amulek. I can guarantee it. Everybody does. And the thing I love about it is, the Lord doesn't look upon us and as lost causes ever. Even the people of Ammonihah, in general, the Lord told Alma, nope, go back, and Alma could have been a little bit like, well, I'm excited. That's great. But really, I mean, these people were spitting on me, dude. I mean, they were about to stone me to death, so it's like, but the Lord doesn't give up on us. He's super obviously merciful, he the mercy that we don't even understand. So we shouldn't give up on people either. Amulek was probably one of the last people that, you know, if you went in and just looked at a ward or into a city and said, oh, that's going to be my companion, and he turns out to be one of the most powerful companions ever heard of in Scripture. You know, it's just amazing. So we should never give up on people. That's part of what's in that Elder Dorf's talk. And never give up on ourselves, you know, when we start to become like Amulek, you know, or are like Amulek or whatever, you know, there's hope.
And it could have been that same thing we talked about where much is given, much is required, you know, that knowing, but would not know, you know, he knew that once he became converted and he stopped rebelling against God on that fourth day of the seventh month, he knew that there'd be certain things required of him. And
that's right.
It took a visitation of the angel to cause that to happen. But it says in 8, it came to pass, I obeyed the voice of the angel. He began to obey and almost immediately began to receive blessings from it.
I love the fact in verse 7 in chapter 10, it tells us what Amulek was actually doing in the moment that the angel showed up. He was going, it says, I was journeying to see a very near kindred. So he's going to see some family, right? Probably family he hadn't seen in a while, probably family that may have told him to come visit, or I need your help with something, or come see me, or whatever. We've all had that. And yet, you know, Amulek could have easily reasoned, like he had so many times before, I would not hear, as Kenny pointed out. But, you know, because he promised his friend or his kinsman that he was going to go see him. But, you know, the Lord had something even better for him to do. I think of the good, better, best. That was a good thing to go visit family. It was great. He could have reasoned that and said, well, Lord, you know, I'm kind of doing a good thing right now. You know, maybe I can get to it in a little bit. But how often are we willing to be an answer to someone's prayer and then act on it quickly? You know, it's just interesting to see that, you know, kind of what he was doing in the moment.
That's a good point. I like that. So, so Amulek in his teaching and preaching there, you know, it says the people began to be even more astonished, and so much so that in verses 13 to 16, they actually go send for some lawyers to bring them in, so that they can try and, you know, trip them up and so forth. And Amulek calls them out on it. And it starts getting really intense there. And Amulek says that, you know, if it weren't for the prayers of the righteous, you know, this place would already be destroyed. You'd already be a lost people. But because of the prayers of the righteous, you are spared, and we're here teaching you this. And then, and I love how in verses 24 and 25 it gets really intense. It says the people were more angry and they were yelling at him. But Amulek says that he stretched forth his hand and cried the mightier unto them. So just kind of visioning that back and forth right there, where they're getting more angry. They're probably raising their voice a little more, and then and Amulek has to kind of raise his voice a little bit and stretches forth his hand and shut them down there.
Kind of reminds me of Joseph Smith in Liberty Jail and the story of him rebuking those guards that had been speaking all manner of evil, and even though he was in chains and in prison, certainly was not forgetful of who he was and who he stood for.
Yes, good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it goes on down, and I know we've got so much to cover here. I love the fact that, you know, when Amulek takes Alma in and gives him food because he's been fasting as such. I mean, this is such a good representation of, if you want to say Alma sort of represents Christ in a way here. Here's Amulek, you know, us as members trying to do all we can to give our little bit of our little effort into the gospel or whatever for the Lord. And what does Alma's turn around and do? He turns around and blesses his whole family. He just blesses his whole family, is everybody, you know, all his children, his whoever was around. And it just makes me remember that no matter, you know, we give what we can to the Lord, but always he's going to return, you know, 50-fold what we could ever give him. You know, he's always going to bless us even more. And I just thought that was a real interesting little thing there in verse 11 in chapter 10, you know.
You never outgive the Lord.
Exactly.
Yeah, we always like to use those scriptures there on our mission. You know, we'd go in to people's homes and they'd feed us, you know, and then turn around and leave a blessing on their home. And
absolutely.
Neat.
And then, of course, when Amulek goes in and he starts talking, it obliterated their whole narrative of, hey, only one witness, is going to tell us this, or only one person is going to tell us these things. And Amulek starts talking, and they're just, okay, well, that's over. Now what do we got, guys? What can we come up with?
Well, that's why they're bringing the lawyers.
Exactly.
Now they're trying to trip them up.
The professionals.
That's right.
It kind of brings us to 11.
11, yep.
Yeah.
Hey, Kenny, why don't you go ahead and interpret all that coinage for us?
That's all right.
I do have something, because I was like, there's got to be a small little explanation for this so we don't ramble on about it.
All right.
But I do have a little, and this is out of the Institute manual.
Oh, wow. Look at Marcus referring to the Institute manual.
This is not for me. This is not my thing here. But basically, it just says that one possible purpose for the inclusion of the Nephite coinage in Alma 11 is to demonstrate the extent of the bribes Zeezrom offered if Amulek would deny the existence of a supreme being. It appears that 6 onties of silver was the equivalent of 42 days' wages for a judge in the society of the people of Ammonihah.
A lot of money.
This is 42 days' wages, not of just a regular laborer, but of a judge. So this is a lot of money. And you got to think too, Amulek's not of small reputation. He even mentions that he's sort of well off, and it had to be significant if they knew who he was. So it was a pretty significant, substantial amount. So
there's a couple materials that I look at whenever I'm preparing this, and one of the commentaries I like is David Ridge's. I think I reference him quite a lot, and he actually puts an actual monetary value on the bribe. He said that in our day, actually, I think he wrote this in 2016, 2017, somewhere around there. He said that it was the equivalent of about $70,000 in our money.
Wow. Just on the spot. I'll give you $70,000 right now.
He didn't reference where he got that, but that's pretty consistent with what the Institute manual is saying. If you think about how much a judge may receive in our time.
And it just goes to show that these guys, this lawyer, think about this. I mean, it says in the end of chapter 10, it says, now the object of these lawyers, Zeezrom and others, was to get gain, and they got gain according to their employee. This is advertising 101 for them. This is the ultimate. This is a former chief judge of the land, and here's Amulek of no small reputation. People know who he is. If I can twist these guys up, and if I could shut these guys down, that's going to make me the best lawyer out here. So
my business is going to explode.
Exactly. That's exactly what they're doing. And so everything that they're not going to listen to what's being said. They're just constantly going to be trying to think, how can I trip this guy up? They're going to miss the mark completely. We hear the talk about missing the mark. I can't remember exactly who gave that, but not focusing on what's important, but they focus on what's going to help them. What kind of gain can I get from this? What can I do and they're just missing all these wonderful things that's being taught by Alma and Amulek while they're trying to, eventually they do chip in, and the spirit does finally get to Zeezrom a little bit, spoiler alert, but that's what's happening here. They're showing out. I mean, Zeezrom's going to show off. This is my skills. This is what I've learned, and they're not really worried. And then the 6 onties of silver and all that, it was just for him to say, to deny Christ. It doesn't even matter if he believed it or not. I just want you to say it. I just want you to use those words. That's going to make everybody feel better about themselves. That's all it was. It wasn't about knowing the truth. It was just about hearing something that made them feel better.
And Amulek didn't even flinch. I mean,
exactly.
You go from 22 to 23. I mean, he just got out of his mouth, behold, these 6 onties of silver.
Yeah.
And he says,
oh, thou child of hell.
That's right.
Ow. It's like, dang.
But he's teaching the lawyer, and it reminds me of what Stephen said earlier, true doctrine understood. Changes attitudes and behavior. Yep. K. Packer, just Amulek's teaching true doctrine, and eventually,
Zeezrom, he begins to really take it to heart. He's like, wow, okay.
It starts to chip away at it. It starts to enter in. His heart begins to soften. That's really what that is. A hardened heart. Nothing can penetrate in. Starts to soften. Things starts getting in, and it's all through that bearing pure testimony, power. Testimony and the spirit being there. It finally gets to him, but I mean, it's all all pretty cool stuff. I mean, there's so much stuff here.
So interesting little tidbit. You know, while we were talking about the money, I actually calculated that based on the average pay for a judge in the state of Georgia. So this is a far more conservative estimate, you know, because what it is in Georgia. Our time. So even in the state of Georgia, the number I came up with is a little over $23,000. So that would be a very conservative estimate. So even on the lowest end, you know, I would imagine
one time.
Judges as far as the country, there's probably not many places where they would make less than the state of Georgia, you know. So I would think that, at the very least, we're looking at about, $24,000.
Yeah, but you said 23,000 in 42 days is what would okay.
Yeah.
So it's okay.
Yeah. For 42 days, yeah.
I like the way Amulek, he says the reason why in verse 23 says, "Oh, thou child of hell, why tempt ye me?" You know, he's not beating around the bush here. He lays it straight. But he says, "Knowest thou that the righteous yieldeth to no such temptations?" Why does the righteous not yield to things like that? Because that's a temporary thing. That's something that's going to be gone. I mean, it's $70,000 or whatever it would equal up to, $20,000. That's a lot. It's great. There's a lot of great things you could do with that money. But, the righteous can see past temporary pleasantries of the world, I guess, is a way to put it. Satan wants us to believe that everything is all that Satan can offer us is temporal type things, other than misery. That's the only thing that lasts with him. So the Lord doesn't deal with temporary things. He deals with eternal things. And that 6 aunties of silver is not going to do anything.
Amulek knows his mind and heart too. The very next verse when he says, "Yea, thou knowest that there is a God, but thou lovest that lucre more than him." You've gotten. And again, maybe he knows how he was a rich man and he knew, but he wouldn't know, and kind of knew the heart of Zeezrom as well.
I think it was those couple of verses right there where it may have pricked Zeezrom's heart, because he went in really he was going to deceive him. He was going to twist his words, but Amulek calls him out, thou child of hell, and you know that there is a God. And so I think he kind of stepped back, and then I think the questions that he begins to ask, and this is just my personal opinion, I think he transitioned and is really inquiring, about the doctrines of the gospel and God and the existence of God.
Simply put, Zeezrom was humbled because he got put in his place, because his whole tactic, his whole lawyer-esque, I'm not putting lawyers down in general. Lawyers can be good people. I'm just saying in this instance, for this particular person that was a lawyer, he learned these ways, how to speak, how to maybe twist some words around to fit his narrative or whatever you want to do. Mm-hmm. But he got put in his place. He was found out really quick. Mm-hmm. And now, what do I do now? I look like a fool in front of everybody. It really humbled him. It put him down. It stripped him down a little bit of his pride. And so now here's where the Spirit can sort of start to penetrate, because basically he's sort of let that guard down because it's been destroyed in a way, by Amulek. So
I think it's really good, as missionaries visits different places, how much more success can you get when you use a person from that town, that community, who knows the people, who can relate, and Amulek related to these people. He's from that city. Mm-hmm. And he was like he said there in chapter 10, there in the beginning, he was a man of no small reputation. He was a popular dude. I mean, so just him going back and forth, not putting up with this lawyer's nonsense. And then there in chapter 12, Alma polishes things. Not polish, but he kind of wraps things up there and takes over.
I like how moving on.
1-2 punch.
Well, so it points out there in chapter 12 where so Amulek has began teaching about the actual. He's starting to teach doctrine about the atonement, about the resurrection, and so forth. And then in verse 1 of chapter 12, now Alma, seeing that the words of Amulek had silenced Zeezrom, for he beheld that Amulek had caught him in his line and deceived him to destroy him. And seeing that he began to tremble under a consciousness of his guilt, he opened his mouth and began to speak unto him. and to establish the words of Amulek, to explain things beyond or to unfold the scriptures beyond that which Amulek had done. So just like any great senior companion would do, he would kind of step in here and finish it up and add that second testimony there. So
yeah.
And Amulek needed this too. You got to think he tarried many days in his MTC with Alma the Younger.
Yeah.
And he needed this opportunity to teach, because we all know, as you give a talk, as you bear testimony, you find your testimony as you're bearing it too, and sometimes, as you're studying. And Amulek needed this also too,
Let me share with y'all my first experience, my first day in the mission field. Okay. Oh. We don't even go to the apartment to drop off my luggage or anything like that. My senior companion, or I get assigned to a senior companion, my trainer, and we immediately go to an appointment. We have that appointment, and then we immediately go and start knocking doors. Mm-hmm. And so we go and we knock 2 or 3 doors, and senior companion, he's basically leading the way and saying everything, and I'm just kind of sitting there, And then he said, "All right, this next one is yours." So I'm like, "All right, here we go." So we ended up coming up to a guy, and he's working on his car. And of course, I got this great MTC,
ready to go.
Ready to go. So I go up. I said, "Hey, sir, we're members of the church, or we're missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we're out here sharing a message about God. Do you believe in God?" He's like, "No." And so my prepared response was not about someone not believing in God.
Yeah, I mean, what's the odds?
So I literally stood there like this. And my companion just sat there and waited. And after what felt like an eternity to me, he finally steps in and starts talking. But man, he stunned me, so I couldn't.
Yeah.
And where did you serve your mission?
Las Vegas.
Yep.
Yeah. So I was like, "Holy cow! Welcome to the mission field, Elder Howell."
Whack! Yeah, you're in it now, buddy. Yeah, I like the way that Zeezrom. He's here to expose. I'm going to expose Alma and Amulek for the frauds they are. And it's interesting that the goal of Zeezrom was to do that, but however, his job was to make his lie appear as truth and to make their truths appear as lies. And yet it didn't work out, that Alma and Amulek, obviously it doesn't work that way when you have the Spirit. The Spirit can expose that kind of stuff. So it's just pretty neat. It's so true. And it's so much harder. I mean, I think all of us here can testify that if you were to pick me up and put me down in New York City right now, or wherever, somewhere else in the world, it's so much easier to preach the gospel to people you don't know personally,
right,
than it is to preach to people in my own hometown, because you start to have these things that they know who I am. They might have seen me do something stupid, and it's not going to come out right if I say this. Maybe they'll think I'm a hypocrite. I don't know, whatever it is. So Amulek, he's got that a little bit on him, that these people know who I am, and here I am all of a sudden preaching in the street. They know I haven't went to church in 6 months or whatever. I don't know, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, also he's and he mentions how he's been a successful person, right? As far as business and everything, and so. He's got that to worry about as well. What if my business, takes a turn southward, because I'm now, out here teaching the gospel.
That's true.
So he's, I'm sure all those anxieties and everything he, as a natural man, he had.
Yeah. And he is the junior companion, as you said. I mean, he's the guy coming in. He's already probably a little nervous.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank goodness for all that fasting and praying and training they did. Hopefully, that we kind of figure they did. So.
And that senior companion.
Yeah, absolutely. And who better? I mean, Alma the Younger. I mean, come on, we're going to be all right if he's my companion.
That's right. So yeah, I mean, chapter 12. It's a lot of doctrine that is taught. I mean, it's a lot of pure doctrine. Anything that y'all want to point out?
I just like the fact that all of a sudden, instead of listening to Zeezrom, the crowd is there to watch this cool thing Zeezrom's going to do. And now all of a sudden they're all listening just to Alma and Amulek because they've taken the show over. It's like, nah, I'm glad y'all all gathered up to see a show because here's a real show.
That's right.
And, and I just think it's pretty interesting that it says the multitude was great. They all kind of showed up to see this, basically to see Zeezrom take out the little guys, but it was a total different outcome. So
the guys stepped up.
Well, to your point, Marcus, in verse 19 of chapter 12, it says, "Now it came to pass that when Alma had made an end of speaking these words, the people began to be more astonished."
Yeah.
And so they're having an impact on them, and then we have another individual, right, that shows up. It says, "But there was one Ammonihah, who was a chief ruler among them, came forth and said unto him, What is this that thou hast said, that man should rise from the dead and be changed from this mortal to an immortal state, that the soul can never die?" And so you've got somebody else here, asking questions, and which allows Alma to teach even further about the resurrection and about the atonement.
Yep. I love the fact that, pretty much anything, Boyd K. Packard said at one time that the knowledge of God's plan, the plan of salvation, basically, provides answers to pretty much any question. If we've got a basic knowledge of the plan of salvation, basically the central part of that plan is knowing that Jesus Christ died for us, and he lived for us. He did everything for us. If we know that plan pretty well, there's most things that we face in the church, most questions can be answered through that plan. I think it's just interesting because that's what they start to do here. They go through the plan and they just start teaching these people basically the plan of salvation, which is what we're here to learn anyway. So I was trying to see, there was another part. Oh, the only other part I had was the lesser portion and the greater portion. Those that don't harden their hearts is in verse 10. If we harden our hearts, we receive the lesser portion of the word. We receive less knowledge, and it's because of us. We're not out actively trying to find more knowledge, but if we harden our hearts, we get the lesser portion. I thought it was interesting that Amulek received the greater portion because he opened his heart and he looked for it, but Zeezrom received the lesser portion. That's why he's sitting there going, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? He could have known these things just as Amulek did, but he just decided not to pursue those things and that kind of stuff. So these outcomes are contingent on our obedience and humility about how much we receive from the Spirit. We have to want to receive it and look for it. So
right. He mentions the first and second death there in verse 32.
Yes.
Says, "Therefore God gave unto them commandments after having made known unto them the plan of redemption, that they should not do evil, the penalty thereof being a second death, which was an everlasting death as to things pertaining unto righteousness."
Yep.
That spiritual death that Marcus and Andrew have touched on.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, they pretty much go over this whole, basically the plan of salvation, exactly what, like I say, that's the most important thing we could teach is Jesus Christ. I mean, obviously that's all that matters is who are we focused on? And that's what they do. I mean, they know their stuff. That's what I love about Alma and Amulek at this point. These are not your typical just run-of-the-mill missionaries. These guys, and I don't want to say that because all run-of-the-mill missionaries are great. I mean, you know what I mean? They're all missionaries, period, are great. I mean, if you're out there and you're striving and you're doing your best, you're doing what's right. You're where you're supposed to be. But what I'm getting to is they put a lot of effort into it. I look back on my own mission personally, and I wish I could go back and do it again sometimes because I feel like I could really get a lot closer and do a lot better than I did at that time in my life. But
well, it's definitely a good example for future missionaries to be as prepared as possible.
Absolutely.
And, I'll share another quick story from my mission. It's kind of making me look a little silly, but that's okay.
From last century.
That's right. Yeah, from a long time ago. No, but so we were reading from the New Testament, and I explained these verses to this individual we were teaching, and they were like, how do you know all this? How do you know this means all this? And so my response was, well, I said, well, we've got these manuals that help us understand, and institute manuals and seminary manuals, things like that and everything. Well, my companion, he says, it's actually explained in the next chapter. Like, okay, yeah. So anyway, okay, my bad. Anyway, so it just goes to knowing the scriptures and being prepared as much as possible. So
absolutely.
But anyway, anything else to close it out?
Great few chapters here. I love it.
Oh yeah, I think it's interesting in verse 20 that Antionah, however you say his name.
Yeah, I was trying to look at it.
He's kind of one of those people that likes to thinks he knows the scriptures, tries to use the scriptures against you to disprove what you believe in a way. Like you might, well, what about this? What if this interesting? Right. He asked him, about immortality and people living forever. He's like, well, what about where the scriptures say that the Hebrew God put cherubim and a flaming sword in front of the tree of life so that Adam and Eve wouldn't live forever. So people don't live forever. And
exactly.
And so Alma like broke it down for him really, and it's like and it's interesting how he does explain it in detail, and it's kind of to me just the image of we see it all the time. I've encountered people like that. I think we probably all have people who I guess think they know just enough about the scriptures to think that they can use the scriptures to disprove the scriptures.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that can be very dangerous because you can get into a part where you're like, whoa, and you wind up sort of like Jackson saying you don't even know what's in the next chapter. That's right. You know that one chapter really well. That's right. And it's like, but
that's like just like with Zeezrom, that's where you have to rely on the Spirit and don't try to rely on your own logic, because
exactly
like with the lawyers, they have that sophistry, they have that the words, and this like in the tactics of lawyers even today goes back to ancient Rome with the sophists. The sophists they spent their entire lives learning argument, learning how to use logic and reason against your opponent. They were basically like gladiators of logic, and so people would pay the sophists to learn how to argue, and then they would go to court, and that's why lawyers got such kind of a bad reputation, because it really, even in Rome, it got to a point where it wasn't about who was really guilty or innocent. It got to be about who could have the best argument, who could kind of argue their way out of something. And that's where these people here, like these lawyers, obviously they had the skills to argue their way out of anything, and rather than try to meet them on that playing field. That's Alma and Amulek relied on the Lord,
and that's important to say that. Yeah, it's important to say that the Alma and Amulek really weren't arguing. I mean, they just laid out the points that were true, and there they were. I think one thing to put out there is that it doesn't require us to know everything to be able to go out and spread the gospel or if you want to say teach somebody something. Or whatever, if you think you can do that or whatever, that's fine. And I think we need to not be scared to say, you know what, I'm not sure. You can say, I don't know, I'm not sure. I'll find out, or I'll find somebody that knows. Don't ever be afraid to step up and say something, at least give what you know, and then if there's something, if they throw something at you and you're not sure, just say, you know what, look to your senior companion, whoever that is, whether it's your actual senior companion or it's whoever, the Lord, the Spirit, whatever, go home, find out, read about it, come back, whatever we got to do. So.
Oh yeah. Ultimately you have to rely on the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
To teach you. I had a conversation with somebody one time. It was kind of funny. He was like, well, your church, it seems like y'all could do a lot better if you send these kids out to try to teach people. Right. These kids don't know nothing. Why don't y'all send people out that know something about what, blah, 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 and I was like, I had to say, it's just, the Lord doesn't necessarily call the equipped. He equips who he calls. They haven't spent 8 years, studying the scriptures, but they,
theology,
they're able to get the job done because that's, they rely on the Lord. And
that's right.
That really is, I felt like a good point, kind of like this, like that Alma and Amulek, they relied on the Lord to guide them.
Exactly.
And they didn't try to engage the lawyers in their own tactics. They didn't bring them.
Absolutely. It's a good point.
Very good. Appreciate it.
I like that.
Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Check out our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, share it. And until next time, y'all keep on striving.